Major changes are coming to Nightmare Dungeons. Are you prepared? If not, I got your back. The tip, let's cover kind of just like the foundation of Nightmare Dungeons. Pretty basic stuff. So what do you need to run a Nightmare Dungeon? If you go into your inventory and you go on the consumables tab, you should have Nightmare Sigils. And these sigils turn regular dungeons into Nightmare Dungeons. And they will have certain affixes or attributes to them once you change the regular dungeon to a Nightmare Dungeon. And these changes, the affixes, the dungeon affixes, are listed in the sigil. So you can know ahead of time what you're going to be running into and what the enemies are going to have according to the affixes. You'll also know what tier the Nightmare Dungeon will be. In this case, it's a tier 40, and this is for the Witchwater Nightmare Sigil. Okay? So this transforms Witchwater from a regular dungeon to a Nightmare Dungeon. So one of the tips is do a quick assessment currently of the Nightmare Dungeon sigils that you have. Why? Because I would feel it would be prudent for all of us to do an analysis of what sigils we have and understand whether they're going to benefit us once the buff happens. And let me define benefits. Throughout this video, whenever I'm talking about tips or my suggestions, I'm talking about utilizing your time effectively and efficiently. Obviously, you can run, I have all these sigils, I can run them. Now, are they the most effective way of my time and getting the most XP and highest item power items? That requires some analysis. So tip number 1, do an analysis of your Nightmare sigils in your inventory and figure out whether or not they are the most efficient use of your time when it comes to gaining XP and getting those higher item power items. So what does that mean? So we know that Nightmare Dungeons, are the only way we can modify the level of our enemies. In other words, the higher tier Nightmare Dungeon sigil, the higher the enemies are related to our leveling, our character's leveling power. Our character's level. We also know that if you want to understand the proper tier for your current character's level, there is a formula to it. You basically take your character's level, you subtract 51, and that's the tier that the devs are recommending you run. So in my case, I'm currently level 73. If I deduct 51, if I do the math, I should be running tier 22 Nightmare Dungeons. So I would be running those level of tiers in order to effectively utilize my time and not get overwhelmed when I'm running a Nightmare Dungeon. So tip number 1, do a quick inventory check of your Nightmare sigils and figure out where you are currently with your level and what the recommended tier level is for your character. And keep that in mind. So I should be running tier 22s, right? So my suggestion is if I have anything that's higher, I will keep them because naturally my character is going to level. My character's level will increase. So I will eventually run these, or maybe I will get in a group and I can run these higher tiers, which by the way, I have done, and you can complete them. But the reason why I bring up the tier level on the Nightmare Dungeon sigils is if you have ones that are lower than the recommended tier you run, I'm going to talk in a little bit about what to do with them. Okay, so we know we need Nightmare sigils in order to run Nightmare Dungeons. We know Nightmare Dungeons are going to get a buff prior to Season 1, and we know Season 1 is coming mid to late July. So we got a couple of weeks to prep. So one of the prep tips is do a quick inventory check of what you currently have and assess if you have any sigils that are below the recommended tier level that you have, because keep that in the back of your mind, because I am going to give you a tip on what to do with those. Okay, so we need Nightmare sigils to run Nightmare Dungeons. Great. How do we get them? So there's two ways we could get them. Number one, they drop in Nightmare Dungeons when you're running Nightmare Dungeons, so you'll naturally get them running Nightmare Dungeons. But there is also another way. If you go to any town and there is a, where is he? And there is an oculist, you can go to him or her, and if you go to craft sigils, you can craft Nightmare sigils. Okay? So there's two forms. There's the sacred form and the ancestral form. And those basically just predicate the tier that you want to craft. So again, the game is recommending that I should be, at my current character's level, I should be running tier 22 sigils, Nightmare Dungeon, sorry. So I would naturally probably want to craft these sigils or higher, depending if I'm stronger, okay? Or I wanted to face tougher enemies and I felt I could handle it. But that's not the point. The point is that in order to craft Nightmare sigils, we need sigil powder. As you can see right there, if I wanted to craft this Nightmare sigil, I need 80 sigil powder. Well, Sam, how do I get sigil powder? You get sigil powder, good question, by the way. You get sigil powder two ways. Number one, it also is a random drop when you're running Nightmare Dungeons. So naturally, just by doing Nightmare Dungeons, you'll get them. But there's another method that you can get them in. So how can you get them? Is you can salvage Nightmare Dungeon sigils, and it will grant you sigil powder once you salvage them. Now, what I'm suggesting is salvaging any Nightmare Dungeon sigils you have that is not an effective use of your time. And in my case, I have, as you can see, this Nightmare sigil. If you look to the bottom right, it requires World Tier 3. So I'm currently in World Tier 4. So there's two options you have with this sigil. That is, I could store it and have one of my alts utilize it once they get into World Tier 3. But I would suggest that you salvage it and get sigil powder. I'm also suggesting that you salvage any Nightmare sigil that's below the recommended tier that for your character. Because sigil powder is going to become a prized commodity. So basically, it's very simple. So I'm going to salvage it. Well, actually, before we do that, currently I have 1,045 sigil powder. As you can see there, highlighted in gold. If we go, where is it? We go over here, and I'm going to destroy this one. And now we look. So now I have 1,048 sigil powder. So as you can see, I got sigil powder by salvaging that sigil. Okay. Now they're recommending that I'm 22. The recommended tier for my character currently is tier 22 nightmare sigils. So I'm also going to salvage these tier 21s. And I'm going to keep the higher tiers in my inventory while I'm prepping for the buff to the nightmare sigils. So this is what I feel something very valuable use of our time right now while we're waiting for the nightmare buffs. Do a quick inventory check of your nightmare sigils. Get rid of anyone that is not in your current world tier. Now, I say that with a caveat. If you are going to be running a lot of alts and nightmare dungeons are a preferred way for you to level up your characters, that's your prerogative. And if you want to store them for your alts, then that's your prerogative. However, I'm suggesting that in order to be prepared for the upcoming buff to nightmare dungeons, that you salvage them and stock up on sigil powder. And I mean stock up, because when we get higher, when our characters get higher, our higher level, if you look, so this is the highest tier sigil you can craft. It's a tier 91 to 100. You know, when I saw how much sigil powder I had, I'm like, oh wow, I have over 1,000 sigil powder. That's great. I think I'm good. I don't know, not really, because this one sigil, tier 91 to 100, it's going to cost me 450 sigil powder, literally half of my sigil powder. Okay, so I think it would be advantageous for us to stock up as much sigil powder as we can. Now, again, I understand running nightmare dungeons, we're going to naturally get them as well. And I also understand and acknowledge that we are naturally also going to get nightmare sigils to drop when we're running nightmare dungeons. So the game itself, naturally, by playing nightmare dungeons, rewards you with both of these currencies. Sorry. The game naturally will reward you with both of these items. However, I really suspect that nightmare dungeons are going to get a big buff, and we're going to be going through these resources really quickly. That's why I'm suggesting we prepare ourselves and equip us with the most amount of sigil powder and the proper tier to our character nightmare sigils as much as possible, because I think it's going to give us a good bump and head start when the nightmare dungeon buff happens in the next couple of weeks. And who knows, maybe it's imminent, maybe it's days away. This is why I'm making this video, so you get ahead of the curve. All right, there you have it. That's my tip. It's a basic one, but I feel it's going to give us the bump we need to hit the ground running when the buff to the nightmare dungeons happens. And let's hope it comes quick, because I really believe there's going to be a major shift from the current status of the game, where predominantly most of the players are grinding regular dungeons over nightmare dungeons. Don't get me wrong, I know players are, and myself included, are mixing nightmare dungeons into their daily grinding routine. However, I truly believe that once this nightmare dungeon buff happens, it's going to be a game changer. And I would suspect that players are going to be grinding nightmare dungeons for the majority of their grinding time. So this tip will give us a head start and hit the ground running once the buff does happen. So once again, I hope this video was informative. I want to thank everyone that has supported my YouTube channel. As I've stated many times, this is a fairly new YouTube channel, and I'm trying to grow not only the channel, but also the community that watches it. So for those of you that have supported the channel, thank you so much. It really means the world to me. And for those of you that this is the first video of mine that you've seen, I want to thank you for watching it, number one. But also, if you can find it in your heart to like, comment, and subscribe, I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And hey, give me some of your feedback and comments on what you think this up and coming buff to Nightmare Dungeons is going to mean to our daily life when it comes to grinding in Diablo 4. I would love to hear your comments and feedback. And for those of you that want to catch me live, I stream every evening on Twitch. I typically start my stream between 8 and 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The channel name is Sammy Caps. I would love for you to come by and say hello. And again, thanks for the support, everyone. I really appreciate it. And we'll catch you next time.